We're going to be announcing pharmaceuticals, chips, and very.
What happens when a superpower turns on its closest ally? In a stunning move that's sending shockwaves across North America, Donald Trump has slammed Canada with a devastating 35% tariff, targeting everything from cars to copper. Is this economic warfare, political theater, or both? As tensions escalate, all eyes are now on Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney. Will he strike back with equal force, or outmaneuver Trump with a more strategic play? This isn't just about trade. It's about sovereignty, leadership, and the future of U.S.-Canada relations. Buckle up, because this battle is only just beginning. Let's dive into what's really going on, an unexpected escalation from Washington. On July 9, 2025, President Donald Trump stepped up his already aggressive trade campaign against Canada by announcing a sudden and sweeping 50% tariff on all copper imports into the United States. This unilateral decision, made without any formal multilateral consultation or pre-notification to Ottawa, reverberated through global markets and disrupted long-standing trade expectations. The policy, set to take effect on August 1st, immediately injected fear and uncertainty into the tightly knit North American industrial supply chain. For Canada, this was not merely another policy twist from an unpredictable administration. It was a seismic rupture in what had historically been one of the world's most stable and integrated trade relationships. And yet, the Canadian response was not one of public outrage or reactionary bluster. Ottawa remained unshaken on the surface, issuing no retaliatory threats or diplomatic blasts. Instead, Canada's leadership pivoted to strategy, treating the moment as a test of patience, preparation, and resolve. Copper, the red gold of the 21st century. Copper may not dominate headlines like oil or lithium, but it is no less critical in the modern economy. Its excellent conductivity, malleability, and resistance to corrosion make it a backbone of infrastructure, telecommunications, clean energy, and defense. From electric vehicle batteries and wind turbines to semiconductor manufacturing and advanced electronics, copper's role in the 21st century economy is growing by the day. In 2023 alone, Canada exported 9.3 billion Canadian dollars worth of copper and copper-based products. Of that, more than half, approximately 4.8 billion Canadian dollars, was destined for the United States. The U.S. isn't just a buyer, it's a manufacturing partner. Much of the Canadian copper exported south of the border ends up in American-made goods that are then sold globally, creating a mutual benefit rooted in decades of interdependence. This deeply integrated trade model is now at risk. Strategic supply chains and economic entwinement. The North American copper ecosystem isn't merely transactional, it's strategic. Mines in British Columbia feed smelters in Ontario, which in turn ship refined copper to U.S. plants in Michigan and Ohio. The United States lacks sufficient domestic mining and refining capacity to meet its manufacturing needs. Canada, meanwhile, lacks the scale of downstream industrial copper usage that the U.S. commands. This symbiosis has long allowed both nations to focus on their comparative advantages. Tariffs like the one announced by President Trump don't just disrupt balance sheets, they sever arteries in an economic circulatory system that has been pumping prosperity for both nations for over a century. For Canadian producers, the cost is immediate. For American manufacturers, the cost is coming. The human impact. Workers, contracts, and confidence. Beneath the raw numbers are real people. Mine workers in Kamloops, smelter technicians in Sudbury, logistics operators in Saskatchewan, and supply chain analysts in Vancouver. For thousands of Canadian businesses, Particularly those in small and mid-sized towns, the U.S. market represents the bedrock of their operations. The 50% tariff does not simply raise prices, it annihilates competitiveness. Canadian copper will, overnight, become markedly more expensive than U.S.-sourced or tariff-exempt copper, making it unattractive to American buyers. Many Canadian companies, especially those that pivoted into copper during previous U.S. metal tariffs, now find themselves on the verge of market collapse. Again. Without exemptions or a negotiated backtrack, these businesses face a grim reality. Cancelled contracts, thinning margins, forced layoffs, or even permanent shutdowns. Companies that depend on the U.S. for even 20% of their sales are particularly vulnerable, with many reporting emergency board meetings and temporary hiring freezes in anticipation of the tariffs' financial fallout. A pattern of pressure. Trump's tariff doctrine. This move is not an isolated flare-up. It is part of a broader playbook. Donald Trump's trade strategy hinges on pressure, unpredictability, and transactional leverage. Previous rounds of tariffs, including those on aluminum and steel, demonstrated the same tactic. Introduce punitive economic measures, blame unfair trade practices or national security concerns, and dangle the possibility of reprieve only if the target nation makes significant policy concessions or shifts industrial operations to U.S. soil. In the case of copper, Trump framed the tariff as a response to national security and critical mineral independence, despite the fact that Canada is a longtime NATO partner, a trusted NORAD ally, and America's most stable critical mineral supplier. The deeper goal, analysts argue, is economic coercion. By applying maximum pressure, Trump aims to force Canadian companies to relocate their operations into the U.S., bringing jobs, investment, and political wins for his administration. A calculated silence. Canada's strategic non-reaction. Ottawa's silence in the wake of the tariff announcement is not a sign of weakness, but of deliberation. Prime Minister Mark Carney and his cabinet opted for a disciplined, behind-the-scenes approach rather than engaging in public mudslinging. Officials from Global Affairs Canada and the Ministry of International Trade began immediate closed-door consultations with U.S. trade counterparts, while parallel talks opened with allies in Europe and the Asia-Pacific. Canada's embassy in Washington was placed on high alert, tasked with gathering intelligence, lobbying Congress, and mobilizing industry allies inside the Beltway. Ottawa also convened emergency meetings with provincial leaders to assess regional impact and prepare mitigation plans. This disciplined posture reflects a strategic understanding. Reacting with rage would play directly into Trump's narrative. By remaining focused, data-driven, and calm, Canada is positioning itself as the adult in the room, offering a stark contrast to Washington's escalating threats. Economic fallout. Provinces on alert. The pain is not evenly distributed. British Columbia, a copper-producing powerhouse, stands to lose the most. Its mining sector is already grappling with global price volatility and a tightening labor market. Quebec and Ontario, with significant smelting and refining capacity, face downstream disruptions. Alberta, though less exposed directly, fears knock-on effects to logistics, energy inputs, and investment confidence. Provincial governments have begun lobbying Ottawa for targeted relief programs, including export credit support, tax relief for affected industries, and funding for accelerated trade diversification. Meanwhile, business groups such as the Canadian Chamber of Commerce and Mining Association of Canada are preparing coordinated advocacy campaigns in both Canada and the United States. Global markets react. The copper tariff has sent ripples far beyond North America. Commodity traders quickly revised their forecasts, with futures prices spiking on fears of supply chain instability. Manufacturers in Europe and Asia that depend on North American copper integration are now scrambling to find alternative suppliers. Countries like Chile and Peru, already dominant in global copper supply, may benefit in the short term, but the broader impact is one of chaos, not opportunity. Investment analysts warn that the tariff signals rising politicization of global supply chains, once governed by efficiency and comparative advantage, now governed by tweets and trade war tactics. For multinational corporations, the message is clear. Geopolitical risk must now be priced into every cross-border transaction. Strategic retaliation or patience, Canada's crossroads. Behind the scenes, Ottawa is actively exploring retaliatory measures. Options on the table include targeted tariffs on politically sensitive U.S. exports such as dairy, coal, and pharmaceuticals, legal challenges under USMCA and WTO frameworks, escalation of its critical mineral export partnerships with the EU, Japan, and South Korea, new tax incentives to retain copper production within Canada and offset U.S. market losses. But Canada's strategy is not merely retaliatory, it's also transformational. The country is accelerating its diversification agenda. Agreements with the European Union, CETA, the UK, Canada-UK TCA, and the Asia-Pacific, CPTPP, are being operationalized more aggressively. Canadian trade commissioners are being redeployed to emerging markets in Southeast Asia and Africa to scout copper demand. A broader question: can the U.S. still be trusted? Trump's copper tariff is not just a Canadian problem. It's a global warning sign. If the United States is willing to punish its closest ally, its largest energy partner, and one of its most reliable defense collaborators, what signal does that send to the rest of the world? For other U.S. partners, Germany, Japan, Australia, and Mexico, the copper tariff is yet another data point in an emerging pattern of American unreliability. Trade deals once viewed as stable frameworks are increasingly seen as political tools. National interests are now defined by domestic campaign cycles, not international commitments. The result is rising skepticism about U.S. leadership and an accelerating push for a more multipolar trade landscape. The road to August 1st. Countdown to confrontation. As the August 1st implementation date draws near, Canada stands at a pivotal crossroads. There is no guarantee that diplomacy will succeed, nor is there any assurance that the U.S. administration will back down. What is clear is that this tariff marks a new level of aggression in the Canada-U.S. economic relationship. Will Canada fold under the pressure, offering more concessions or agreeing to relocate critical sectors into the U.S.? Or will it respond with firm resolve, defending its industries, asserting its sovereignty, and rewriting its trade future? Mark Carney, a veteran of financial crises and global diplomacy, knows that this moment transcends copper. It is a referendum on Canada's long-term strategy, in an era where trust is no longer the currency of global trade. Trump's copper move signals a broader agenda. When asked about his motives, Donald Trump rarely leaves room for ambiguity. On his preferred platform, Truth Social, the former president declared his intentions to rebuild the American copper industry as a cornerstone of his broader industrial renaissance. Copper, he posted, is the metal of the future, powering EVs, military systems, data centers, and America's return to strength. It was a declaration both patriotic and strategic. But beneath the surface, the move bore the marks of calculated leverage rather than sustainable industrial planning. Unlike steel or aluminum, where U.S. smelting capacity has made some recovery over the past decade, America remains significantly reliant on foreign copper, particularly from allies like Canada and Chile. Copper mines take years to build, and expanding smelting infrastructure involves immense regulatory and environmental hurdles. Trump's August 1st tariff deadline provides none of that runway. It's a countdown clock rather than a growth timeline. For manufacturers, this means higher input costs almost overnight. For consumers, the ripple effects will be felt in nearly every modern product, from smartphones to solar panels to EV batteries. What Trump labels as industrial policy increasingly resembles economic coercion. His real aim appears to be not domestic revitalization, but negotiating power. Economic pressure to force allies like Canada to the bargaining table under duress. Canada's strategic silence. Carney plays the long game. Ottawa has yet to make a dramatic public move. Industry Minister Melanie Joly confirmed that while no formal executive order had been issued by Washington, Canada is monitoring the situation very closely. Prime Minister Mark Carney, known for his technocratic caution and aversion to public sparring, has maintained radio silence, a stark contrast to Trump's megaphone diplomacy. Behind the scenes, however, Canada is active. Ambassador Kirsten Hillman, Canada's lead negotiator and a seasoned diplomat in multilateral economic forums, is in Washington working relentlessly to secure a bilateral exemption, what officials refer to as a carve-out for copper. Canada has succeeded with similar strategies in the past, notably during the aluminum and steel tariff battles of 2018, when quiet diplomacy bought Canadian industries crucial breathing room. But this time, the stakes are steeper and the timeline tighter. A self-imposed deadline of July 21st looms over Carney's negotiating team. That gives them less than 2 weeks to engineer a deal before Trump's August 1st tariffs hammer down. We're focused on protecting workers and the companies at the front line of this trade war, Joly emphasized, drawing a direct line from policy to livelihoods. Power in timing, 2 styles, 1 high stakes. Game Trump's strategy is as loud as it is blunt. He makes declarations on social media, sets public deadlines, and dares adversaries, foreign and domestic, to resist. It's classic brinkmanship. Canada, by contrast, moves with restraint. Each word is measured. Every response calculated. Carney knows the world is watching not just what Canada says, but how it says it. As August 1st approaches, this difference in approach becomes a test of endurance and control. Trump holds the microphone. Carney holds the clock. And in trade wars, as in real wars, timing can determine victory. Escalating the crisis. Pharmaceuticals enter the crosshairs. Just as negotiations over copper intensified, Trump raised the stakes. On July 8th, flanked by cabinet members, he made a bombshell announcement. The United States would impose tariffs of up to 200% on pharmaceuticals imported from countries that fail to reshore drug manufacturing to American soil. The tariffs would include a grace period of up to 18 months. But beyond that, everybody pays, Trump declared. The implications were immediate and staggering. While trade disputes over commodities like metals often impact manufacturers first, pharmaceutical tariffs strike at the core of national health systems. They jeopardize access to essential drugs, inflate costs for healthcare providers, and destabilize complex international supply chains built over decades. This wasn't just an economic shot across the bow. It was a direct assault on the way global healthcare functions, and it sent allies scrambling. Australia caught in the crossfire. Among the hardest hit was Australia. The country exported over $2 billion in pharmaceutical products to the US last year, making it one of America's top 5 pharmaceutical import partners. Much of this trade involves blood plasma products and vaccines, with biotech giant CSL operating major facilities in both nations. But Australia's vulnerability wasn't simply economic, it was ideological. At the heart of the tension lies the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme, PBS, Australia's national drug pricing system. Under the PBS, drug companies must negotiate prices with the federal government to have their products subsidized. It's a model that has kept medication affordable for millions of Australians, but has long irked the U.S. pharmaceutical lobby. Now, under Trump's tariff plan, what was once a philosophical disagreement has become grounds for economic retaliation. Treasury Minister Jim Chalmers described the move as deeply concerning and confirmed that Australia would not bow to American demands to weaken its PBS. "We will not sacrifice the affordability of health care for trade appeasement," he said. This principled stand, though admirable, has left Australia isolated. Unlike Canada and the UK, which have negotiated partial exemptions by pledging increased defense spending, Australia has no pathway forward, no scheduled meetings, no diplomatic channels open, and no alternative suppliers in place. Canada's quiet defense, fortifying from within Canada too, exports pharmaceuticals to the US, primarily generics and specialty compounds. It also imports a significant share from American manufacturers, but instead of confronting the US directly, Canada is taking a more surgical approach. As of early July, no formal tariff letter had been received by Ottawa, but Health Canada and MedTech Canada have already sprung into action. Analysts at the University of Toronto warn that up to 90% of raw materials used in Canadian pharmaceuticals come from India or China, and that Canadian drugs often cross the U.S. border 2 or 3 times before reaching patients. A 200% tariff would fracture this delicate supply web. In response, Health Canada has begun identifying critical medications, from insulin to cancer drugs, and building a priority list to shield from supply shocks. Canadian associations are feeding real-time data to Carney's cabinet. Meanwhile, medical experts in both countries are lobbying Washington not just on economic terms, but humanitarian ones. "We're not just trading goods," one Toronto biopharmaceutical executive said. "We're trading lifelines." Strategic humanitarianism, a Canadian doctrine, emerges. What Canada lacks in headline-grabbing rhetoric, it compensates for in long-view policy. Carney's approach to the pharmaceutical threat echoes his response to Trump's copper and auto tariffs: quiet coordination, institutional resilience, and an appeal to shared values. Canadian negotiators are pushing for exemptions on the grounds of humanitarian need, public health reciprocity, and integrated cross-border supply chains. In Washington, Ambassador Hillman has reportedly met with members of Congress, U.S. health agencies, and key pharmaceutical stakeholders. Their pitch: disrupting Canadian access to medicine doesn't just harm Canadians, it strains American hospitals and labs too. Canada's firewall is not just economic, it's moral, and it's being built from the inside out. Trump's endgame: bilateral deals at any cost. Trump's broader goal is clear: force countries into one-on-one negotiations where the U.S. holds all the leverage. It worked with steel. It worked with autos. Now he's trying it with medicine. But there's a critical difference. Pharmaceutical supply chains are more fragile. They touch more lives. And they involve not just factories, but hospitals, clinics, and families. Tariffs in this sector aren't just a business issue. They're a public health crisis in the making. That's why even U.S. lawmakers are getting nervous. According to reports from Capitol Hill, medical lobbyists and several senators have begun urging the White House to scale back the scope of the pharmaceutical tariffs. But Trump, true to form, is holding firm. If they don't want to pay, they can stop selling to the U.S., he said. "We'll make our own." That bravado may win applause from populist voters, but behind the curtain, it's causing long-term damage. Allies who once viewed the U.S. as a partner in innovation now see it as a toll collector, leveraging access to health for strategic advantage. a fracturing global alliance. In the final analysis, both Canada and Australia are facing the same storm, but they've chosen different shelters. Australia has opted for confrontation, defending its domestic health system with principled defiance. Canada, ever pragmatic, is building a firewall, internal preparation, quiet diplomacy, and backdoor channels. Neither path is easy. Both carry risks. And as the August 1st deadline nears, the world is learning a harsh new lesson. Under Trump, even medicine is fair game in the trade wars. Conclusion: we are witnessing a transformation not just in policy, but in principle. The U.S., once a beacon of scientific cooperation and humanitarian leadership, is rebranding itself as a coercive negotiator. In this new world order, access is privilege. Medicine is leverage. And the ability to endure, not just speak, is the new mark of sovereignty. Trump may dominate the headlines, but it is quieter leaders like Carney who are redefining what resilience looks like. And in the battle between pressure and principle, the world is beginning to understand. In trade wars, trust is the first casualty, and time is the last defense. The Trump copper tariff has lit a fuse beneath North America's most essential trade relationship. For Canada, it is more than a short-term policy battle. It is a defining test of its economic independence and political maturity. While the U.S. may wield the bigger stick, Canada holds the long game: credibility, alliances, and quiet strength. And as July turns to August, one thing becomes clear. When tariffs replace trust, the rules don't just change. The entire game does.